As a preliminary matter, this is Jillian Prendergast. I am the chair of the Finance Committee. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Linda Holt?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Katie?
Yes.
Nathan?
Yes.
Khadija?
Yes.
All right, great. So that is all our members and staff. So I see Greg, you're also here.
Yep.
Hear us all good? Awesome, thank you. All right. So good evening. This is an open meeting of the Finance Committee. It is being conducted via Zoom. Speakers on the agenda will be participating remotely, and the chair may allow for the public to provide comment. Please provide note that while an option for remote attendance and or participation is being provided as a courtesy to the public, this meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual broadcast to individual attendees unless otherwise required by law. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, so please take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. This meeting is currently being recorded. For meeting materials, all meeting materials will be on board docs. And we recommend that the members of the public follow along the agenda as posted, unless I note otherwise. And we will now turn to the meeting agenda itself. I see, Greg, that you're here. So the first topic is the FY25 budget, and then subsequently multi-year planning discussion. So thanks for coming tonight.
No problem. Is it?
I think that, can you hear? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think I circulated before this meeting, I circulated around some of those line items. So thanks for sharing that with us. I think the committee had some questions on those potentially, and also sort of about prioritizing some of those different items. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to talk about preliminarily before we jump into questions.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. So if you didn't catch what I was trying to say on Saturday, is that the budget FY25 is still pretty fluid because I have about $200,000 I now have to figure out. So that means like whatever you see is not, can't be the final. I mean, like I'm gonna have to make adjustments either way. And it is what it is. But $200,000 is no small amount, so it's gonna be tricky. Like what I thought was the priorities are gonna have to shift. But that being said, nothing's changed yet. So like what you look at is what the current recommendations are. Okay.
And this, just to refresh everyone's memory, this was because of the unexpected changes in healthcare cost?
No,
basically?
No, sorry. So I'm sorry. So here's it's two factors. Primarily, actually, it's the numbers that we got from House 2, which is the governor's second year of budget proposal. And what I had done in my budget recommendations had assumed a 2.5 increase to both revenue from the state as well as assessments, which is like less revenue than we would receive because of whatever formulaic factor goes into it. So yes, the governor had provided like a 3% increase over current fiscal year for unrestricted government, and that's good. But just mainly because of formulas, and I can find it, but I had provided it to y'all earlier. The breakdown, what's called the cherry sheets. Oh, there you go. So the cherry sheet is what they just call the sort of like developing state budget, and the breakdown per municipality. The big figure is right at the top. See, like the third line down, charter school reimbursement. So that's almost half of what we got in this year, right? So yes, some things went up, like unrestricted government aid, which she said she was going to do, but I think out of her control was the sort of application of whatever our enrollment figure was going to be, and that's just where it is. So all that being said, so that's one factor, and then the second factor is what you just talked to, Jillian. I got my health insurance figure, so I haven't even met. I got that on Friday, so I haven't even met with my consultant to just kind of like figure out what that means and why, and just exactly what we're gonna have to pay. And I haven't gotten my property insurance figure yet either. So, I mean, again, my recommendations are all based on projections, which are informed by consultants or history. In this case, I had asked. There was a budget subcommittee meeting months and months ago when we talked about trying to better predict enrollment figures and how it might shake out, so that we can kind of better, like not be surprised when, when we get cherry sheets. And the superintendent's office, like they understood the question, but they didn't have any insight for me at the time. And so anyways, I had the recommendation I did, and I was off.
It might be a naive question too, but if there's less enrollment, does that mean that there's obviously less reimbursement on the sheet, but is there also less cost? Because
Yeah, good question.
But
I doubt that.
can I just,
Go ahead, Peter.
before we get too far down this,
Yep.
I think this is likely, or more likely, a factor, and I won't pretend I'm an expert, but my understanding of charter school tuition reimbursement is that it goes down over time. So the first year a student elects to go to a charter school, we get close to full reimbursement of what the sending tuition is. But then as that student is there for, into year 5 or something, our reimbursement from the state goes down dramatically. So I think that's likely what's going on here, but
then would that mean we have
No.
less new enrollment kids?
no, because so the town pays, on rough numbers, something like 17,000 to send a kid to charter school. The state, reimburses that much more in the first year, but by the time we're paying for the 4th year, the state is reimbursing us much less. So we're still paying the 17, 16, 15, I don't know how much it is per year, but something like that. But our reimbursement from the state goes down, because we're supposed to be able to absorb that over time, that, we don't have to pay to educate the student.
But then still, so our expenses would stay the same, but if we're not actively enrolling children at the same rate as a new student, right? Then,
Right.
because yeah.
I understood your question, Katie, because that makes sense to me. Like, yes, the amount of reimbursement per child goes down, but a new child when they start at the original.
So then we have less new children than previous years, potentially.
I'm no expert, but that makes sense to
Right.
me. But I'm not sure.
But that doesn't mean our expenses go down necessarily, but it's good we have less new enrollees, potentially, just looking at the highlight of it.
Jillian, can you actually slide down just a couple of lines on this and see what is our sending tuition?
The assessment is lower.
So it did go down. So
Okay.
it was 1.694 and we're down to 1.57, which is pretty
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
Because, at one point we were predicting that to get over 2 million. If you
Right.
start doing, 2% every year.
all right, I see Linda has had her hand raised for a bit.
My question is on the regional transit, why are we spending almost 100, what are we getting for 100,000 in regional transit? I have no idea what that is. But it's a minus, right?
That's true. So we're part of the Lowell Regional Transit Authority. So we have access to their vans, which they give us access to the vans and the maintenance of those vans. So like
So it's the Council on Aging vans mostly?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay, the
And
COA vans, okay,
and the commuter shuttle van. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
But that's also a state assessment. We don't really get a choice
Right.
in that. The state, that's by state law.
It's all formula, yeah.
Oops, sorry, I'm trying not to get the dog barking. Natasha?
Yeah, as I think, so the formula for the charter school reimbursement, it's like 60, like the first year, it's like 3 years, 60, I can't remember, 60, 30, 10 or something to that effect. I can't remember. I know it got changed, but I don't remember the exact discretion, but they're also enrolling all the way up until 9th grade as well. So that's also what makes it a little bit harder to track, is that it's not only starting in sixth grade can start, but you have kids who might not go there until 8th grade or later. So it's a kind of a constant rolling, and that's where that formula looks at all of those. But each year, you, depending on the first year of their whatever grade they start, is the higher reimbursement rate, and then it's the lower. So I think I'm hoping we're seeing a downward trend, but we should see a new report. I know Colleen has to send the state this month, which is the anticipated enrollment numbers for different schools. So we might have more information by then.
Natasha, does that include Assabet or is it just AMSA?
Appsabet is not the charter school, so that's not assessed in this
Okay,
particular way. That is a separate allocation where
that's
you
school
get.
choice.
Nope.
Oh.
That's where we have to pay that flat dollar percentage. I think was it Greg 9% or something.
This,
This-
I mean, it changes it each year, but this.
Yeah, it changes every year, but it's a separate allocation of
Yeah.
off the top. It'll be like
Okay.
Assabet. So that's their one, and we don't get assessed anything separate from that particular allocation.
Yeah,
Okay,
that shows up as a line in the operating budget,
Right.
Right.
not as part of the state
Right.
aid stuff.
The school choice, which is the other bucket, which I think you were kind of thinking of as well, that does show up here in the assessment. So you'll see right there, sending tuition, how that
Yeah.
went up about 10,000, which is probably like one student.
right, that's a lot.
But I mean, it adds up. And then we have school choice receiving, and that goes directly to the school, and that's decreasing as well.
All right. Mike, I see your hand is raised.
Sorry, can I follow up for 1 second,
Yeah,
Jillian?
Yes, please.
Just to
Yep.
Natasha, that school choice money, that's part of what's making up that 800,000 that you're proposing to add to FY25 budget?
Yes,
Am I correct?
that's that
Right, okay.
largest, that's the one that's gonna be dipped in, yes, out of that 800. And that's the one that, I think there was a slide in the presentation to everyone earlier on in the month that had like a historical trend for
Right.
the school choice.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You still have a question, Mike?
Yes, well, not so much a question. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
You can? Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, my microphone is dodgy. So I did just find the Mass DOE information about the reimbursement. You get 100% the first year, 60% the second year, 40% the third year. So that's how that works out.
Thank you, that's good to know.
All right. I was trying to pull up the document from, so I think you sent us another document, and my computer is having quite a lot of trouble tonight, unfortunately. Here it
Do
goes.
you want me to? Oh, you got it.
I think I got it. Let's see if this is the right one. So this is the one with the updated
Yeah, that's, yep.
changes. right?
I took
So-
that data from the cherry sheet and then I put it into like, this is the kind of the usual go-to single page for the general fund. And you can just see this is the breakout.
Yeah, this is another way to look at it.
Yep.
You can see that down at the bottom here.
Yep.
145.
Yep. So I got that.
So I don't think this doesn't have the benefit
No.
change.
Yeah, I haven't changed any of that. Nope. So I got this like a day or two after I had to submit my budget.
Yep. So this number here, the employee benefits, is the one that could potentially change to make this closer to
Yeah, that's right.
200
And
something.
yes, so we generally try to plan for, we try to sort of capture the budget as best we can. Inevitably, the budget sort of even changes even after annual town meeting because whatever sort of variation there might be at the end of the day from the state budget, because we won't know the state budget till July or August. And then, when we go to town meeting in the fall, there's usually odds and ends, including the state budget, to capture in an amended general fund budget. So it's very fluid.
All right, thanks.
No, the
Are
increase in
there,
general government, was that largely from moving utilities from all the other accounts into the government account?
Yes. Yep. But general government will also probably change once I get my liability insurance, because that comes out of that, not because it's not a benefits, even though it covers town officials and whatnot, but it's property insurance really. So it comes out of general government.
And the increase in public safety, you said there was a new like negotiation for a salary. Is that all of that 6%?
Yeah, the police. Yeah. And then but I've only had one meeting with the firefighters so far in their negotiations. Their contract expires at the end of this fiscal year. So well, like I said, it's a working document.
you don't have to raise your hand, Linda. You can
Oh,
just jump
okay.
in.
Oh, I can just talk. Okay. Anything on the
Please.
receipt side, Greg? I mean, that you can use to close this gap. We're gonna
Yeah.
have,
I appreciate that question. That's where my first thought goes. And I look, I know you mean local receipts, I believe, right? So
well, I don't know. I just heard, I mean, I'm the liaison to the Economic Development Committee, and we just got a thing about a big new lease at
yeah,
Parket Place. Does that
Yeah.
impact will we get any tax revenue from that? A big new
Yeah.
store, big new building?
no, potentially, yeah. So but it might have already been captured. So my chief assessor,
Okay,
who's Rick Ladd, like he looks at building permits that have already been pulled, or and he tries to sort of be predictive as best he can, like rooted in some knowns, if you will, or like but either way. So you can see it's $350,000 of new growth. So that may include, that's the Tractor Supply store you were
Yeah.
talking. So that may include like that anticipated, although the lease wasn't signed yet, so maybe no building permits have been pulled yet, so maybe he didn't include that. So these are good questions. I'll go back to him and ask. If it was a new restaurant, maybe we wouldn't have included any projected meals tax increases. So so we do try to look at it either way. But the Tractor Supply is going to have personal property, so that's another
okay.
of revenue. But my plan is to, I think I meet later this week with the finance team. So these are the sort of questions we're going to ask, and then eventually I'll look at all like the projections we already made. And I was aggressive in some areas already, so you really have to kind of ask yourself, like, so how much further do you want to kind of push?
Yeah.
Revenue is one of those funny things. You really you try to capture it right. You try to get it right on the nose. Inevitably, like, revenue comes up and down. So restaurants open, restaurants close. Maybe the marijuana doesn't have a good year. I have no idea, but like there's always factors like that. And so it's helpful, like, to kind of this will be another opportunity, even though I've already submitted the budget, I'll take another look at the revenue projections we had. I probably won't change the new growth up.
Yeah.
So that was already kind of pushing the envelope. I think Rick
Yeah.
was not, it was kind of like at the top limit of his comfort zone to throw out $350,000. And that's probably, I mean, I said this last year, but I've been saying it, you know, like there's no more new market baskets getting built. So like that, it's probably going to be $350,000. That's the expectation, I think, going forward.
But Powder Mill, that whole corridor might be potential
a
for
good
new
point.
growth, or the Beijing school or
Yeah,
whatever.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
That's the idea, is to sort of, if it's, you know, if the planning board's proposed rezoning and the Powder Mill corridor, you know, an overlay to allow for MBTA, adjacent communities compliance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If that happens, and then, but that's only a rezoning. That itself is not the growth. So then you have to, you have to wait and see. And even the Beijing Royal School, which is, it's the Fa Zhang Development Group, but we've been calling it the Beijing Royal School, but it's but that's in Beijing. So the Fa Zhang development is, we haven't heard from them in a while, but when we heard from them a couple of months ago, they are sort of re-examining what they want to do with the project. So I don't know. Our plan is to hopefully allow for creative ideas for that development if the zoning, you know, like the new zoning, which is supposed to sort of like allow for growth and change and creative reuse of properties.
Now, how about accessory dwelling units? Will that increase?
Oh yeah, that should
assessments?
too, right? Because that will increase
Yeah.
your assessed.
But that will be not
yeah,
this year, but next year, FY.
That's a good point. I'd be reluctant to, I think you know, that would probably, I bet Rick would get nervous about like how much he would gamble on that. Because, you know, we don't know how many people would take advantage if that goes into effect. But it's like, you know, it's like anything else. Like sometimes it takes a year. So even when, you know, even when people move into, they may not register their vehicle to the town, you know, when they register their vehicle. So like we won't see their excise tax, so to speak, for another year. Like government's slow. It takes a while for it all to mature. But I mean, those are the right questions. I think inevitably I'm going to have to adjust the expenses. Like even if I sort of like, even if I kind of, you know, do the best I can to kind of push where I can on certain revenue, I think it's just inevitable. I'm just going to have to go back to my revenue expenses. I was going to ask my department heads tomorrow who wants to give up what, but I had to cancel the department head meeting, so I'll catch them later.
You got a break.
I know this is a bad question, but anyway, do you have a timeline for when the next balanced version might be released? Or
so I tried. That's a good question. I do try to keep the board informed as it goes along. I was surprised about getting the health insurance number when I did, because we have a scheduled meeting with our health insurance rep. So we get health insurance. It's Blue Cross Blue Shield, but it's from Maya, MIIA. And I wasn't scheduled to meet with our Maya rep until February 20th. And so I didn't expect the email so early. So my expectation was, instead of like going to the board one meeting and say, I figured out how to figure out $145,000. And then the next meeting say, scratch that. I had to figure the whole thing out because of new, you know, health insurance. I'm trying to kind of do it one off. So maybe the first meeting in March of the select board, because technically it's not my budget anymore. So it's been submitted to the select board. So it's their budget. So I'm actually making recommendations to them to adjust my original recommendation. But I think probably March is when, I think there's a meeting March 5th. I don't recall, but that's probably when that's kind of like my internal sort of deadline when I want to pitch to them a solve for that.
okay.
But I email everybody kind of all at once when I send stuff out.
Greg, are there any opportunities for regionalization in things like health insurance, any where we could utility expenses, where we could be more efficient if we joined with
Yeah.
others?
No, it's a good question. That is a good question, and it's a kind of a it is a good question. I think I asked that to the department heads not that long ago because I think it got brought up at a budget subcommittee. I can't recall, but either way, it's a good question, kind of regularly asked. So a lot of our larger costs are either already negotiated or we regionalize where we can. So here's an example. We negotiate for our energy supply and our energy delivery, right? So I'm actually paying a different rate for supply and delivery than you guys are, right? So from residents. So we went out to bid through a consultant, so we have a different rates than just a regular household would. So, but that which is good. Like we and the reason we're different from you, meaning an average single family household, is because we have that many more lights and switches and draw. Like we're attractive as a buyer, and so we went out to bid for that, and we have a good rate for that. As far as regionalization, we do regionalize when we can, but it is limited. We it's in small ways more than big ways, frankly. Like we have a public health nurse now, right? But that's through an agreement we have with Concord. So we get her for 2 days a week, and she's in Concord for 3 days a week. I don't know. It's regionalization is tough. Like I do ask that question. I don't think any of my department heads are opposed to regionalization, but I can't think of anything right now that we would explore to try to like solve that budget gap for this year. I don't think so.
Not this year, but like even public safety.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Going forward, yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's a great
maybe not
question.
this year, but another year.
No, I agree with you. Just to kind of like to illustrate my understanding of that question, and I appreciate it. When I started working for the state many years ago, it was under the Patrick administration, and they were all about regionalization, and they were giving grant money out to like get like whatever the hurdle was to get people past themselves. Like, why does everyone need their own animal control officer? You don't. If you can share an animal control officer, but you need like $10,000 to be able to hire, then that we would give out grants to that. So I'm on board for regionalization, and that's the rub is everyone else has to be on board too. I'm trying to think, like we do regionalize certain public safety services. So we have basic life and support, but we don't have advanced life support. So we buy into. You guys have seen it. It's like you see like it's not the Emerson truck, it's another name, but like you'll see like a different ambulance go around. And that's the advanced life support. So, like there's a number of towns that all pay into that. So we do where we can. I like in certain counties further west or on Cape Cod, they're reliant on regionalization. We're not as reliant on regionalization here in the Metro West. But it's a good point. I even think about sharing stuff with schools when we can, but that's just tricky. Just because schools is so they're they need to be self-reliant in many ways, and we're small. Like town hall is small, but if there's a way when I can partner with the schools, I will. Like I'm just talking out loud. I'm thinking out loud, but we do think about these things. But I'm also open to ideas, so please keep the questions coming, and that'd be helpful.
So yeah, on the topic of the schools, so one of the consistent themes I keep hearing every year from the school's budget request is for clerical support, particularly to recover some of the spending that the schools does that's eligible for Medicaid reimbursement. Do you know if there's any potential that you could lend some clerical staff or lend your financial staff to the schools to try to recover that Medicaid reimbursement?
That's a good question. I don't recall. I may have been asked that question before. I don't know if I have. I can look into it. I doubt that I have the capacity to lend staff to the school administration for that. It's a good question.
So I will also just point out that those Medicaid reimbursements goes into your general fund. So the town actually has probably the most incentive to actually share that resource and to actually do the clerical work, because that goes directly into your fund, not the school's fund.
That's true, but Kevin, I just want to clarify something. I really don't look at it as town versus schools. I know that sounds cliche and like you just have to take my word for it, but I really don't look at it as like, oh, I get more money in the general fund, and I really don't. I looked at all the town departments. I know I sound like a broken record because I say this every year, but like I looked at all the town departments first, and I kept the schools at their request that I was given until the very end. And then I try to reduce the town department's requests as best I can and increase the revenue wherever I can. And then basically whatever I have left, that's what I try to give the schools. So it's not like it's like we're all in this together, and I really do mean that.
Yeah, I'm just of the perspective that, there is a potential positive ROI,
Sure.
return on investment, from this clerical spending.
Sure.
The schools, I mean, their mandate from, the school committee is responsible for their students. The superintendent usually gets evaluated based upon the performance of their students. And I will just point out, like, from a staff perspective, like, all the staff is evaluated they're not really evaluated based upon how much money they recover from Medicaid.
Okay.
So they really do not have, when they do the budget request, they really don't have the incentive to, prioritize clerical spending. They're going to prioritize spending on the students.
Okay.
So I think, what would be nice is if the town side could see that, or even just look into it and see if there's the potential for an ROI there. And if there is a potential for a return on investment there, I really think we should lend whatever resources we have. I recognize, of course, that your financial staff is limited and small, may not even be qualified, but I think, that there's the potential for a return on investment. I would just like to see someone put in the work, whether it be schools or the town, to try to recover more of that money.
Okay.
All right. I think one of the other questions, I'm going to bring up something else here for this question, but I think you might have already answered it. This was from your messaging budget.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we had just was around facilities. Is that because you moved this into the other line
Yes.
item?
Yeah, so that's the energy cost mostly.
Okay. Great.
So what we did is, so go to utilities, there it is. So like we tried to, okay, so this looks bad for multiple reasons. One, we did shift it. And then two, energy costs are skyrocketed. And that's actually, here's what, I'm nervous in a couple of ways about my recommendations. And one of them is just energy costs. So on one quote that was like a 30-something% increase to energy supply. I can't remember what it was. So that number reflects the low end. Like there was a range between what the energy predictions could be, which we got from our consultants, not even from the energy company. We got it from people who we pay to tell us, what we need to hear. So, and it with that number reflects the low end of the projections. So hopefully everyone's turning off their lights when they leave the office.
Okay.
I have another question for Greg, if that's okay. So
Yeah, of course.
Yep, so I've reviewed the recent select board minutes and I have not seen anything regarding the solid waste disposal trash committee. Have you received a recommendation for them? Or are we still waiting for them? Are we still waiting on them?
We're still waiting. I haven't gotten a recommendation yet.
Okay. Is there a particular time frame that you need to have a recommendation by in order to sign a contract with the solid waste
Oh, that's a good question.
provider?
I haven't looked at it in a while, so I'll get back to you.
So just another thing to bring to your attention. After reviewing the prior proposals for the future of the solid waste, particularly upgrading our solid waste disposal to a automated cart system.
Yeah.
I did note there was the potential for many hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think I noted it as a conservative estimate about $500,000 in cost savings to be had by modernizing our solid waste disposal system. And I don't want to preempt the committee, but I just want to bring this to everyone's attention, particularly since we're now facing a shortfall and we now have to have more difficult conversations of what to cut to meet the shortfall. I really think we should be looking to the solid waste and the modernization of the solid waste to potentially recover some of that cost and potentially make all of our lives a lot easier, particularly if we can get that, some cost savings there. I do see Mike Stevens is present, and he does have his hand raised. I think he might have something to add to this.
Yes, thank you. Only on the solid waste issue, I have been attending the solid waste meetings as the liaison, and they are getting significantly closer to be able to doing their presentation. I believe, I can't really speak for them, of course, but I would say it's probably within the next month or two of that nature, something like that. But I will certainly check to see whether or not your suggestion there has been on their agenda.
So, Mike, I know you were recently elected, so I can send you some of the materials that I have that is the basis for my opinion. But I really think this could be the modernization of our solid waste could be the great budget savior here.
Right. Yeah, I am not an expert, but I think it should at least be included in the discussions. And I know they're doing their very best to be as thorough as possible. So.
Yes, and I have the full confidence in them. I just the worst thing I want to have. I think the worst case scenario is that we bump up against the deadline and we miss the opportunity. And then we have to have the difficult conversation about what to cut to meet this shortfall.
All right. Does the committee have any other questions or comments about the FY25 budget? I tried to run through the ones I collected last time here at our last meeting.
I do have one last question for Greg. So what service cuts are we looking at with this budget on your side? So are there any service cuts that we're looking at right now with your recommended budget?
With my current recommended budget?
Yes.
Well, that's a good question. So generally, no. So I was able to, I didn't have to lay off anybody. I didn't have to reduce staff. It's going to get a little hairy to, make all the ends meet with it's mostly contracts, we have a number of unions and otherwise. So no, in fact, what I was proud of doing, which I'm going to have to now re-examine, is I tried to, with the direction of the select board, they really want to make sure that we emphasize maintenance. So I, you might catch that like there were some increases to particular maintenance lines, and that's what that reflects. So no, and maintenance, as the name implies, means same service level. Like we're trying to make sure we keep what we got. In addition to that, like there was some upticks. We've been trying to invest more in tree maintenance, right? So like we're always very reactive to trees, and sometimes the money just runs out before we get to the end of the year, and that's not good. You know, like we do minimum vegetation control, but you know, we try to get to all the trees where we can. So that's just an example where the select board had heard that, you know, like we could invest more in trees. That's what we try to do. Unfortunately, now everything's on the table. I need to get about 200 grand. So I'm gonna have to, and you know, yeah, I'm gonna have to get creative, which means like some of those maintenance increases. Preferably I don't have to go below where our current budget is, but
Okay.
I have to look at.
So the schools did say that they are going to have to make some minor cuts to services. Some of the more drastic cuts are being avoided because they're drawing on limited use funds. But they are having to do some service cuts. Can I ask your reason for why are you recommending that other departments maintain level services while you recommend a level of funding that requires some minor service cuts from the schools?
Well, that's a good question. So, that's a good question. I don't think I have enough insight, which is both by design and maybe my own naivety, that I know what the impacts to my budget recommendations is going to be the school department. So when I meet with the superintendent and his team in the summertime, we kind of go over like just general what Prop 2.5 is going to give us for the next year, right? And so like, and then through the course of the next couple of months and with the budget subcommittee meetings, et cetera, we just sort of try to make sure we're all on the same page. But I really don't know what, in this case, 2.74% means for his, you know, the school department's bottom line and what they're gonna have to do for services. I really don't know. As far as the town side goes, I try to, as I said, my priority is to keep the people I have and then see what I can do as far as all the other expense accounts. But that's easier said than done because I have to keep the lights on. I have to pay my fuel costs. I have to meet all my, you know, we have to insure the buildings. We have to insure our people. There's almost no discretionary spending. So and I wish there was more. That would make my life a little bit less stressful. But it is that level service budget in its truest form. That's really where it is. And I do try to be open and communicate with the superintendent about what it means. And I'm you know, like that's what he presents. And that's the conversations we have when I say like, hey, if I give you X, what does that mean? And then he tries to tell me as best he can what it means. But I can't really, that's kind of the limit I can talk to the school department because they're just, it's a very complicated and very different beast than what you see. Like I can print you off all my accounts pretty easily, but I don't see his accounts. So which is again, like by design and maybe like a little selfish of me. I just don't look at his books.
Okay. But you did see I imagine you probably saw the same or a similar presentation that we received from the school department.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So here's another point. My recommendation is to the select board. Okay. So if the select board says, Greg, thanks for all your work. You know, but it looks like you prioritized A over B. You know, we don't agree with that prioritization. Show me what it looks like if you went the other way, whatever department, you know, emphasis that might be or otherwise. I'll do that, right? I work for them. So I gave them, but your question was to me, I understand that, but I did give them what I thought a recommendation would be, at least to maintain services.
Okay. Well, maintain services on your end with some minor cuts.
Okay, but again, I know, I feel like you don't believe me when I say I do see it as this, like, I feel like you're not hearing me. I do care about the schools. Like I'm not
accusing him of anything else.
In the past, I've asked the superintendent, if I give you X, like whatever my recommendation is, does that mean layoffs? Like I am genuinely concerned. If what does that mean in FTEs or otherwise to that effect? I also negotiate all of the health insurance. So that include the great majority of our subscribers are teachers. So I am very sensitive to the impacts of my budget recommendation to their operations. And like if they increase their FTEs, that's a cost to towns' health insurance. So it's not really an us versus them. Like the budget is this. Actually, for those of you who can't see me, I'm crossing my fingers. So it is very much integrated. It is like one budget.
I understand. I just, we have to explain the budget to town meeting voters. My read on the budget and what I would like to say to town meeting voters is this budget will maintain level services for X, Y, and Z departments, will result in minor service cuts for the schools.
Sure.
And I'm just trying to get some color and some context as to the why behind those decisions so I can explain it to town meeting voters.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's the responsibility of the finance committee. You're right.
Kevin, I think maybe you weren't on the call when we were talking about general government and some of these other increases. This is because utilities are being shifted from other accounts into one account. I don't know if you were here for that part of the call.
I did see Greg Johnson's note about that, and I think that is a smart move, and I applaud that decision, particularly given the fact that there was some. Yeah, I think there was maybe it was one last town meeting or the one prior to that. There were some utility bills that had gone unpaid.
Oh, that's true. But that's true. That's not direct. I'm still mad about that, but that wasn't directly because of the energy. But you're right. Like I think I know I cut you off, Kevin, but I think I'm picking up what you're putting out there, which is having utilities more controlled. Like it's a sort of consolidated all those accounts so that we can see them better and control them better. Because I said this during the joint budget review. Like I have one facilities manager. It's Justin DeMarco. It's another one of his hats. So like we can see all of them better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not faulting you for that at all. I just, I think it's actually a great reaction that you did to something that you weren't even aware of. And
yeah, but I don't like not. But you're right. Okay, so thank you. I'm telling you, it was still sore. Obviously, I don't.
Yeah, it's still sore. I mean, I don't think it was your fault that you this bill went unpaid, but I think it's a great step you're taking to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's an example of like the accounting. Like every year we look at these things. Like every year we look at every account and we ask ourselves like, what's the better way to do these things? And I have a new town accountant, and so like he's also he's been in the town for a long time, but it's good because he's giving a different perspective and sort of like a fresh look to it. While he struggles to figure out all the other things I throw at him, but he's doing good. Obviously the big number here is that from $2 million to $5 million for the new elementary school bonds. I mean, that's just like the big change in the budget.
Right, but that's balanced out at the top by the revenue.
Yep.
Yeah, but I just it looks all like,
that's sort of a zero.
Yeah, I remember last year my PowerPoint for the joint budget review looked really weird because we lost the Fowler School. So like that was like a weird wave of debt and revenues.
And Greg, is that at the 83 million or the new lower number?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that's the 83 million. Thank you for asking.
Oh, okay.
I will double check because I think when I got these numbers from my my debt scheduling and debt figures, that comes from the Treasurer Collector's Office because they talk to bond counsel and the Treasurer Collectors is like the bank of Town Hall. So they figure out like how much money do we need to take out because we anticipate paying whatever. So thank you for bringing that up, Linda. I will because we just got the amendment to the project funding agreement submitted, which reflects the slightly different number. So.
And I think the answer is no, but can we use the residual, like the 30 million for anything, for all those capital projects, or no? We can't use it for any other purpose than what was voted?
Oh, no, you're right.
No,
yeah,
right, no, okay. I knew the answer was no, but I just.
Oh, it's okay. I was like, we got 30 million? No. Yeah, it's, no, it goes to the schools.
All right. I think this has been a very productive discussion on the FY25. Is there any last words or lingering questions here before we move on to rough future planning? No? All right. I am going to keep this future planning topic super high level. So let's see. Having a lot of technical challenges with Zoom today. All right. I think so. This is something, let's see, I'm sharing the correct one. I should be sharing the screen right here. So, right, so something that people, do you see a spreadsheet that says base projection? That in the tab at the bottom, and then there's, okay. Something that was asked at our last meeting is why don't we use actual numbers instead of the projected numbers, which had been used in, you know, the annual town meeting and special town meetings to make these budgets. So generally how the budgets work, from my understanding, is we use estimated new growth based on historical trends and averages and, you know, the best guesses from people who have a lot of experience with this. And we don't use the actual new growth numbers because that comes in after the vote, but we usually will balance. So you want to balance the total revenue and the total expenses to be zero because that's how it works. So if you throw in the new growth numbers that are actual, sometimes this changes because they're a little higher or they could be lower. But I think in all these years, they were higher. And you get these numbers up here in yellow. So, you know, and this is the numbers that are between the difference. This is the net surplus or deficit. In this case, they're all surpluses between the total revenue and the total expenses. So, and this is something that we talked about, Greg.
Yeah.
A little bit. So thanks for trying to walk me through this. So I thought we should bring this to just bring this to the committee to talk about. So the expenses are things that we vote on as a town at the annual town meeting or the special town meeting. So these numbers were the numbers that were voted on. So these numbers don't change unless I made a mistake. But these are taken directly from those warrants. So the expenses shouldn't change. So I was trying to understand, and maybe we can talk about it just a little bit more here so it sinks into my brain, about why there is a surplus. So this is what you could tax up to, but is not necessarily taxed because we only vote to pass the expenses.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So is that right? So does that mean we just leave this on the table and we don't actually tax that additional money?
Well, you capture it the next year. So you can't go to town meeting and ask for more money than you actually expected to take in, right? So that's why we estimate lower, like we're conservative in our revenue estimates for new growth, right? So like 1 year, like we were just looking at the last thing, and my recommendations for FY25 is $350,000, right? But I got that number from my assessor, who must in his brain thinks so we're actually going to get more money than that, right? Because he's not going to tell me more revenue than he actually thinks we're going to take in. So there's a difference there. But we set the tax rate according to what our actuals are. So like when we set the tax rate, we're like, okay, here's the actual assessed values of the properties in town. And so you can tax up to, you can tax up to the assessed values that you need, but you only tax as much as you budget for, like you said, Julian. So like if we there's usually a delta between how much you're gonna, how much how much the town says you can take from them, like to, you know, like how much their expenses are going to be for the budget, and then the actual assessed value that's possible to take from them. The idea is it's a healthy practice to always have money on the table, if you will, is to always have, like, you don't tax up to the full amount. It kind of lets us back away further from what's called the levy ceiling. So there's a levy ceiling. So every year we levy, meaning you take taxes. You have a levy limit, and the levy limit is what you can tax up to. That's 2.5% new growth. So that's 2.5 plus new growth. That's your levy limit. And then you have a levy ceiling, and that's like, I think it's 2.5% of all the assessed value in town. Something like, I can't remember what the definition is off the top of my head. I sent Jillian a link to all these. You can just Google Department of Revenue Massachusetts levy,
Yeah,
and
I'm
you'll get
gonna
like,
circulate it.
and it's gonna explain it better than I am. But that's the math behind it, is like we tax as much as we voted we were gonna budget for. But then the next year we get, like, if you look at even the earlier spreadsheet, you'll see that there's a difference between what we went to town meeting what the expected revenue was, but then what our actual revenue, you know, for the next fiscal year is. It's an increase, and that's all by design. Like, that's just good fiscal practice. Like, you try to be conservative in your revenue, because you can't spend more than you're going to take. Which is why I get nervous about, like, the governor's budget. So if I mean, technically the governor's budget is only her proposal to the House Ways and Means. And then the House Ways and Means does a proposal to the Senate Ways and Means. And then the Senate Ways and Means is a proposal to the Joint Committee. And then all that goes back to the governor's desk to sign. So do we have to adjust the budget according to what is really the first evolution of the state budget? Technically, no. Is it good practice to adjust the budget according to what might be the budget? Yes. So generally, that's what we do. But you even heard from Senator Elridge on Saturday that, like, the you know, that's not the end of the world. Like, that's not the end of the budget. That's just what you got from the governor, and then the legislative body might increase. I mean, so you don't know. So that's why we have special town meeting.
All right. So thanks for that. Thanks for walking us through that again. So I guess my call or my question to the committee is, do you think it is helpful to use these numbers, or is it confusing? Because these are not the numbers that are in the ATM or the warrants. And are people going to be confused why there's a net surplus, and they're going to be like, well, you have a $213,000 on the table. Why do we have a deficit? So it's more of a, what would, for the future planning as I'm setting this up, because I think in the past people wanted to use the actual numbers, but I'm not entirely sure if that's necessarily helpful or if it's going to be confusing. So I wanted to just talk to the committee about that, see if anyone has strong opinions. This is not going to at all change the expense side of it.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but isn't that surplus only ever going to appear looking backwards? So for future planning, won't we necessarily just be looking at the, like, estimated growth?
I would agree.
So,
sorry, Julian, go.
yeah, no, that's fine. I was, that's what I had in my past planning, and some people had requests that I use the actual numbers and not the projected numbers or the estimated numbers. So I'm just trying to do a sanity check here to see if people think that using the actual numbers makes sense, or if I should just go back to using the estimated numbers. Because the estimated numbers, everything will zero out every year. I don't know if it matters. Maybe I'm making a problem out of nothing. I'm probably overthinking.
Well,
No, it makes sense.
No,
I get your issue with it. Go ahead, Peter.
yeah, I was gonna say, I kind of liked it matching what we did at town meeting and using the same revenue estimates that we had at town meeting. I mean, it potentially is somewhat useful to have the actuals there, because then you could argue we should be adjusting the budget or changing what we're using for assumptions. But that's true of all the line items, you know, whether it's local receipts or the expense numbers. And I think, you know, each year's budget is informed by prior year's actuals. So I just think it's more consistent and better to use, you know, the town meeting budget.
Yeah, and I thought Peter and Jillian, you had done an analysis where we looked at the budgeting and we weren't off that much from actuals when we looked at all the different accounts. I mean, it went up and down for the different accounts. And being off
I think that was
200,000 on 450 million isn't that big, right? Is it?
right. I'm guessing that was looking at free cash analysis.
Yeah. Oh, maybe that
which,
was
you know,
it. Right. The free cash was balancing out
Yeah.
the ups and downs. I mean, this is, I
Right.
just like 200,000 out of 50 million is like 0.4%. It's a really, that's really close.
But this, just to note, free cash is generally more in the range of, you know, rough numbers, $1 million a year. This is changing only new growth to the actual. It's not changing anything else to the actual. So this isn't, you know, the same as the free cash number.
So it's only changing line 13, I think, and I might have updated a couple of math errors for the 2.5% increase.
I mean, I always like seeing more numbers rather than like fewer. So like to me, I like how having the actual numbers, you know, you see the story going from the levy limit of the prior year to the new year, and there wouldn't, if you just have the estimated amount for town meeting, there'd be a gap there. What if you had two lines, one for the amount that was estimated at town meeting, and then a second line for the delta? And then you can then add it together that you get the levy limit for the next fiscal year.
Could do that.
Actually, if you were going to do that, what about adding it not to the current year, but to the next year? And then the stuff would add up the way Nathan wants. So so for FY19.
So I think, isn't line 12 sort of what people started doing, amended new growth? Is that what that's supposed to be? That was, I guess, maybe a follow-up question.
I don't remember what that is. I mean, that may be it. That may be the change, but it doesn't seem like it's big enough.
And what are we
that
allowed?
change-
Oh, sorry. What are we allowed to do with the actual new growth or our projected new growth? Can
So we follow. I'm trying to help, but I think everyone's like pretty close. I think what Nathan said is how we budget. So I looked at instead of, so when we started FY25, so this is the next year, which is what Peter was recommending, I think. And I'm sorry for putting words in people's mouths, but if you're looking at the next year, you start at what what your actual growth was, as opposed to your projected, what you set your budget to, and then you do 2.5% over that. So it's I mean, I have it on one of the other spreadsheets. So like if in FY24 at the October special town meeting, as you have in that red, that's it's a different number than what I started FY25 with because we set the tax rate on a different growth number than what we went to town meeting. Like it was a different number. I wonder if the so the Division of Local Services is like the municipal side of the Department of Revenue. I wonder if they could break this out in a way that would also be helpful. I mean, like, I just don't want, Jillian, I don't want you to have to like worry about making errors if the DLS has already done all this math for you.
Right. I am totally, if there is something that's already done this, I am a
Yeah,
fan
maybe.
of using it because I
So
want to, I
when I
don't want to
said-
make whoopsie-poopsies.
I sent you an email today. All I did is I went to what's called Gateway, and it's Gateway is like the platform that Division of Local Services uses to capture and then to report on municipal data, and it's most of it's public, and it also, you know, provides excellent graphs and all the other stuff, and so you can so like today, you know, when I was just curious because it's been a while, so I looked up what the levy ceiling was for the town of Maynard, and I just typed in, I just Googled Gateway, Massachusetts, and I just started clicking, and then it gave me, it's, you know, you can choose the municipality. I chose the municipality. Like it was pretty user friendly. So if everyone's curious, like you can plug in, you can get all these numbers.
And Jillian, I went to a webinar that they had, and they have a fiscal projection template and a manual. And I don't remember, I was looking over it and we're spot on. They kept saying this is so important to do, and they have a template, but I don't remember this number, but we could definitely look there and see what they recommend. And they have great staff that I think will help us here to see what we should use.
That's true. And the Association of Town Finance Committees is also a really good source. And maybe that's what you're referring to, Linda. I don't know what you went to, but like they put on webinars, they host like seminars,
Yeah.
and there's a good network. My understanding is like they want to help other towns. Anyway, I'm just saying.
All right. So what I'm hearing is maybe I'll see if I can figure out how to capture in what the estimated growth was and then the difference between what the actual growth was to get the real number, quote unquote. Because I don't have my camera on. Computer doesn't have the bandwidth. Can't see my hand signals today.
Jill, if you want to double check your math, send me anything. Send me anything, and then or
Okay.
you can even send it to me and I'll help you out. But you also do have access to staff, right? So Rick Ladd is our assessor. He's the one that has to report on the growth numbers, right? So he's the one that
Yep.
goes to the Board of Assessors, and they use data to be able to come up with a recommended the tax shift between commercial and residential, and then, you know, that results in tax rate recommendations to the select board. But in other words, like this data that you're looking at probably started at him, or his predecessor.
Yep.
You know,
This-
Andrew.
I took this from his email that he sent.
Oh, sorry. So there you go. You did it. So like if you have a question about that difference, he's the man.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I'll rejigger this a little bit then, and I thought amended new growth was the difference, but I'll have to double check because I don't think that's what that is.
Did we? I'm
Could
actually.
it be money that we didn't spend the prior year by
I'm trying to
accident
remember.
or something?
Or did we amend new growth at special town meetings? I might have to research.
Oh, maybe.
I might be forgetting. I'll have to check.
Thanks. Okay. So I think that was my main question about making sure we build a strong base. I'm gonna rejigger my sheets here. So the other question. So the other question is, how are we going to think about historical trends? So what would be the most efficient way to do that? So one way to do it is looking at the percent change between fiscal years, like adjacent fiscal years. So you can see sort of a trend over time, but that's just comparing 1 year to 1 year. So how would, if we're going to look 5 years in the past, are we going to take an average of these percents? Are we going to sum them and do some kind of a correction because we have COVID years in here? Do we want to look back further than FY19?
Yeah, I wonder if we take out
I
COVID
don't-
years even, because that skews it so much.
I don't know. So this is something I think we should have like a discussion about. I don't think it's going to be something we solve tonight, but I think we should definitely at least think about it. And, you know, some line items are sort of all over the place. So do we need to do something unique with considering how we're going to project how they might change? And I think we should maybe just look 3 years into the future. In the past, we had been talking about 5. But, you know, some of these line items are just all over the place and we don't always have control over them. You know, and some of them, like maybe these school choice things, maybe we can try to tie them, like we talked about earlier, to the number of students. But I don't know if you could project that. I think, you know, you can probably project how to win the lottery. So this is something, and I don't know, Greg, if you have any suggestions, like if you use a certain tool, you're sort of looking year to year, right? And
Yeah, I don't have a
any
magic.
insight,
No,
key reading
No.
there, believe, no,
no,
nothing?
I guessed. So you're talking about, I was distracted a little bit. You were talking about the like the cherry sheet numbers we get, like as far as assessments and revenues from the state?
Yeah, and sort of when you're thinking about making your projections for the upcoming year, how do you come up with the percent change in the different departments? Like, is there?
In the different departments? Or, I'm sorry, are you,
So like between these line items, you know, like I'm looking at, you know, over the past X number of years, this has always been 4 or 5%, but you know, something like this has been all over the place.
Okay,
So,
interesting. So I don't, that's interesting. I haven't done this exercise to look at, I'm fascinated by your top parts about the growth change. I didn't know it was 4 or 5% between years, but because I don't project that I get from my assessor. So he says, like, after setting the tax rate, here's what your number is going to be, and then therefore that's what we start the next fiscal year with. So that's a different conversation. But when it comes to those revenue projections, like you were just pointing out, that it is all over the place. Which I started this meeting with by saying, like, we had asked. This came up at a budget subcommittee meeting, so I asked the superintendent's office if they had any insight, and even they said, like, it's unpredictable at this point. So no, they didn't have any insight. So in which case I just did. All right, so like maybe we'll just do 2.5% for all the cherry sheet numbers, both for assessments and revenues, and it didn't play out,
Okay.
but that's just because we didn't know. Now, on the one hand, I was actually low in my revenue projection because the governor was going to give a 3% increase for unrestricted government aid, but I was off significantly because of what we already talked about with the reimbursement rate for enrollment. As far as the a lot of those other numbers, like I'm even looking at the top, the bond premium reimbursement, that I mean, it's not that much money anyways, but we get that from my treasurer collector's office and just says, like, here's how much return we've been getting off that. So it's, again, I don't have any projection. Yeah, I don't even have to predict that. I just get that number. Even local receipts, you can see even that's all over the place. 7%, then negative 3%, then 9%, then 6%. So like even that comes up and down according to. That is a conversation I have, literally looking at every number. How many dog licenses? Or there might be a policy change. Like at the last town meeting, the town voted to authorize an increase to late fees. So that comes out of the treasurer collector's office. And so like we had to project both how much an increase to late fees might disincentivize people from being late, but two, inevitably people will be late. So how much revenue might we get from that? So in other words, it's not as like like baseline overall percentage increases. It's much more nuanced than that. When it comes to the expenses, as you're kind of focused on right now, generally my expectation is well, actually you can see right there, about 1 to 3% per department. But that might change. I'm curious why it's 15% in one particular year for general government, but it's generally 1 to 3% for the individual departments. But again, that's even relative to, I mean, like the library, which is culture and rec, that's tiny, you know, like, I don't know. So even if it's a 7% increase for 1 year, that's still relative. That's not nearly the same like matter of scale in thousands of dollars compared to a different department. You know what I'm saying? Like the libraries.
Yeah.
Department. Yeah. But no, I don't go into it saying, you can't ask for more than this percent. Actually, according to the charter, it's the select board that sets the policy. They issue a policy statement according to the charter, but it's largely the same every year. But the policy statement just says, like, overall, we know that there's no new market basket showing up tomorrow. So like, don't expect like a huge payday when it comes to revenue. So you're going to have to keep your budgets pretty level. And that's the message we get from the select board. And that's what all the departments understand too. So when I get departments budget submissions, generally it's contracts are going up, costs are going up. They might point out something like I was just referring to for maintenance, and that's largely public works. They might say, hey, like, we haven't been putting enough money into trees. I'm just picking something. And so that might go up, but it has to be justified. So if in that case, I was able to point to, that particular initiative was directly tied to the select board goals. So I don't know. I don't think I'm helping giving any clarity to you, Jill, but I'm just trying to point out that it's not as prescriptive as, hey, X department, you're only getting 1%. It doesn't work out like that.
Right. No, this is, for me, it's more trying to understand trends. And I also want to, make sure that the trend that I'm looking at is something that's real, and it's not like, if you wear a skirt, like scientific trends, sometimes it's like, you wear a skirt, you're going to get cancer. It, like, has nothing to do with the trend. It's just some random math that happens. Like, it's not real. So, yeah.
I mean, what I would say, there's trends within these lines. So if but even then it's not all that known. Like, so generally we don't hire a lot of people, right? Like, we don't increase our FTEs on the town departments. Like, it's small, like, we're a small town. So we don't add a lot of FTEs. So if you're looking at trends, it's going to be like, well, based on the collective bargaining agreement, the union deal we have, you can sort of predict how much your cost is going to be for 3 years. But after the 3-year mark, you can't really predict it because you don't know what the negotiating is going to come out at. I wish there was more predictability in all of these things. Believe me, it is, but it is every year I have to look at each account and nitpick every account. But either way, like, that doesn't, I don't mean to say this is a fruitless exercise. Actually, I really appreciate this exercise. And it's something that I've been trying to do for years. It was like my first finance committee 6 years ago. Like, we talked about two things: financial policies and projections. And I appreciate that. So it's something that I wish we could kind of like, but no municipality has perfected this, far from it. But everyone does
No.
To sort of, like, as Linda was kind of pointing out, like, everyone sort of like has best practices you try to strive for.
Yeah. So basically I'm trying to set it up right now so you could change this percent number here and it should update like everything to the right.
Cool.
So just understanding as a committee if we think how we would like to do that, or if we just want to be able to make a spreadsheet where we just change the numbers however we feel. I think some people in the past have asked if there's a way to change a single year. Like, so if I update this number, it'll just change this year. And then I have to update some other number to change it for 26 or however far out we want to project, which is more work. So, I mean, I might err on the side of just trying to do some flat changes for the next 3 years just to see trends. But this is basically, I wanted an open discussion to see what people think is useful and not useful, and look for suggestions, because if we're gonna make this kind of a spreadsheet, it's, I think, a good way to do it collaboratively rather than just me making something in a vacuum that doesn't have a sanity check, so to speak, to it. And then at the bottom, you can see the deficit numbers, or in this case. So this is, you want this to be 0 for a balanced budget is what the goal would be. So, you could say, oh, it's not 0, so I'm going to change this 3.7 to a 2.7 or whatever you want to do. So, like, you could change any of these numbers. Or, if you say you want to, like, increase, the school budget to, like, 5% or something, you could see what that would do to the rest of the budget. So you could even type an override in here if you want to add another, you could add an expense line in that's an override for 1 year and see what that does. So. Any thoughts, feelings, suggestions? You hate it, you like it, you want to see X, Y, Z?
I like it. I have a version that I was kind of messing around with a little bit that I think I'm going to email you to see what you have to think about it, Jill, where I was taking like Peter's numbers where he was like, look, where he had all of the like the individual line items by department, and I was doing like kind of what you were doing, but like instead of doing it by like the department, I was like doing individual lines in addition to like what the overall department was. And there's a lot of junk in there, kind of like, how like Greg moved the utilities from one account to another. It's like every year there's like one or other thing that's like moving from one account to another. So we'd have to kind of go back and manually sort through some of that because there's like something like there's accounts that suddenly go to 0 or new accounts that appear out of nowhere. But I don't know, it might be useful. So I'm going to email that to you.
Cool. Is there anything you want to give us a sneak preview on? I can give you sharing privileges, I think.
Sure. It's on my other computer, so I was trying to move,
okay.
move
No
it
worries.
around.
I will
I
ask
guess-
if we think. That's okay. I also want to be mindful of Greg's time too. So to see if there's any additional topics. I have, for the ATM, I have that spreadsheet. I think that Greg Wilson shared with all of the different articles on it for the ATM. So I have that information. Is there any other pressing questions for Greg tonight, or? Because he's been hanging around for an hour and a half. You're welcome to hang around for more. I just want to.
That's okay. I just got
I feel like right now we're just gonna.
my kids are
Oh, you just got a
home
text
tomorrow,
message?
so I guess I know where I'm going to be tomorrow anyways, but that's okay.
Well, they're home. They
They're
canceled.
staying home tomorrow. Yeah, Acton Boxborough. And now I'm getting a phone call. So here we are. That's
Official.
okay. Now it's
Yeah.
official. No, this is good. This isn't a waste of my time, Julian. I like this conversation. I want to be able to help y'all because eventually, like when you go to town meeting, like it kind of everyone needs. I kind of want everyone to make sure we're all on the same page. Like we can disagree, whatever, but I want to make sure I'm at your disposal when I can. Plus, I don't have a meeting tomorrow night, so I can't complain.
Oh, there's no town meeting tomorrow?
No, select board was last week and then next week. Oh, and Monday's a holiday, though. So Monday's a holiday. And actually, don't the kids also have winter break? Is that next week? Is that the week?
Next week.
Next week. Katie, no, yeah, it's next week. Mo, but this is good. I also, I know I do send a lot of data out to you guys, but don't hesitate to ask me. I appreciate that it goes through Jill. I do. But there's no dumb questions. Like this stuff is complicated.
All right. Cool. I think I made you a co-host, Nathan, so you can probably share stuff now.
Okay, cool. Let me see. Okay, can you all see that this spreadsheet?
Wow, good job.
Yep.
So this is only looking backward. It doesn't have
Wow.
the new year's numbers or anything yet. But basically here's all the departments. And right now it's sorted by, this fiscal year 24 high to low. And it's just the percent change from the previous year. And this is just going by the numbers in the spreadsheet that Peter had going around. Maybe education isn't the best one to look at because you have all these details here and then all these like lines zero out, and we just have this maintenance of plant for the past 2 years. That's what I mean. Like we'd have to like really like dig into it and figure out if this is a useful way of even looking at it. Let's look at the library. This is a little bit more consistent. Like you can see the director, the salary for each of these positions. And I'm hoping that like maybe we can, if the teacher's contract comes up every like 3 years or however often, and we see a bump every 3 years, that's something we could plan for. Same thing with like any other union contracts that come up at regular intervals. And I just thought like, there's a lot of noise here, but it might be useful to look at line items to check out trends rather than the department as a whole. But then again, when we're setting budgets, it seems like we're setting it like, we're not looking at the individual lines, so that maybe that isn't the most helpful way of looking at it. What do you all think?
I mean, my sense is anything we could do with future planning is going to be really important, because if we're looking to change any practices, gain any efficiencies, it would be a great way to model going forward. I don't know where we'll find those efficiencies, but
you could maybe overgeneralize one factor across all the departments. So I know that wasn't very clear. Let's say this. Let's say you do a 2 or 2.5% increase to anything that has to do with salaries, right? Just to like, you don't know, maybe it's negotiated 2%, maybe it's negotiated 3%, or maybe they're like police. So I had a couple of police officers that got higher degrees, and that means, because of their union contract, they get more money. But I don't know that going, like, I don't know when they're going to get their diplomas. So we project only so well. And then, or retirements, like you don't know, who's going to retire, and presumably the next person if a police officer retires after 20 something years, we hire a young officer and they're not getting paid the same because it's a step and grade system. So they're at the bottom, but if you just want to apply some factor, you could just say 2.5% to any salaries going forward. You could do the same for health insurance. You could say 5 to 6%. I don't know. You pick a number, and then that's I know this is. I feel like I'm also patronizing you guys, and I know you know this. Like this, but because the exercise I'm describing is something that Bob McCarthy's tried. I think Jillian, you've tried. Like this is this kind of standard budgeting forecasting trick. Is you just have to like pick a number and then you change the percentage according to what you do. The unpredictability is what's the killer part. That's the frustrating, because I'll get an email that I thought it was going to be a 3% increase for energy costs going forward, but as it turns out, it's a 20%. Like I don't know why. So like you just kind of have to roll with it year by year. But at least you can have a conversation about forecasting out 5 years based on certain assumptions.
Yeah, and I think that's, like you said, that was something that we tried in the past, where we would try certain flat increases in one budget category, and some of the other ones we would try to, that were more consistent in their
Right.
rhythm, or whatever you want to call it, their trends. We could try something else and using the past data there.
Okay, cool.
That's a good suggestion. Okay. Yeah, I think that's neat, Nathan.
Yeah, good work in putting that all together. That's awesome.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so theoretically,
One of my questions while you're working on that was, would this be like the purpose of all of this information? Is it to share that with town members, or is that just for us within the finance committee making recommendations as far as the budget goes? Like,
My
would this be a
personal
tool that
opinion
we
as one member. Yeah, my personal opinion as one member is that if it's just for us to use, I don't think it's as useful as it could be. So
Right,
I would like to
right.
get buy-in from other committees and their feedback. Because if some people are considering, a big potential override or a debt exclusion, is that the right word, when we want to do something, a capital project or something, like if we want a senior center or something like that, we can see what that would look like. The thing that's
Yeah.
not currently in this is what the average tax family bill is. And I don't think that's something you can easily calculate just from the total budget, unless I'm wrong, Greg.
I
Like,
found some data online
it's
and I
complicated.
did a visualization of that, of what our average tax bills have been over the past 10 years.
Yeah,
So
no,
it's available
That's
from
something I would
DOR.
like to-
yeah, DOR does do that. What was your
Yeah.
question? Can you predict going forward, Jill?
My
I'm not sure.
question is, if we know what the total, if we have an estimate and say, like based on our projections, the total expenditures for this year will be, I don't know, $540 something million. Can you like somehow divide that to say, like, based on this total number of the expenditure, this is what the average family would be? Like, that's not a pluggable equation, I would assume.
Actually, I think I do know what you're talking about. So we do that exercise. We do that exercise. So if you look in the board docs for Saturday's meeting, you'll see how I asked that specific question to my assessor, like what would be the average single family tax bill based on my recommendation of almost $54 million, right? So it's complicated because he has to take that budget and then apply it to his predictive growth number and what the average single family household would be, which he did. I can't remember what it was. It was like $505,000 was the assessed value of the average single family household. And then he thinks like, okay, and then the next year it's going to go up. And he came up with a number for that too. Again, like it's all estimates. Like he doesn't know. But he does do that exercise. I'm curious if you could, or maybe DLS could do it too. I don't know. I wonder if you could project even further, like let's say if you could assume some sort of pattern, some sort of like trend to that increase, as flawed as that may be because of growth up or down either way. But like, I wonder if you could assign a pattern to it and then just see, going out 5 years or so, like how much the average single family household bill would go. I mean but then again, that does not include like if you do a debt exclusion for a new elementary school, that just throws off the whole trend. So that can be kind of frustrating. But either way, like if you're looking at like just the regular, again, not even you also have to assume there's no operational override, right? So like we haven't done an operational override in a long time. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And
I
you
can
can
pull
see,
it
like,
up from
yeah. And then I just included in the notes, that's the assumptions that were made.
Yeah, so I don't know if we do our projections and we have like a total cost and, you know, based on how everything projects out, the total expenses, if there's some formula in the spreadsheet where we can estimate this and say, you know, the average tax bill is estimated to be blah, like $10,000 or whatever it is.
So that's after you do the exercise of like, let's say FY26 or whatever. Like if you, after you assume certain, right. And then so you say, okay, so if the general fund is $58 million because of your assumptions, what might be that? All right, I get that.
Right. So if I'm saying like, this is what we're assuming total expenditures will be 52 million.
Yeah.
The average tax bill based on 52 is going to be blah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's clever.
Instead of like being like asking, you know, going every single time and being like, this is, you know, future projection model F.
Yep.
And here's like 7 other ones. Instead of asking every single time, is there some generalized formula we could add in here maybe?
I don't know. I'm going to ask Rick Led, the assessor, like how might he go about that same, it's just an exercise, but like I'm curious if he could.
Yeah, just an exercise.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, cool. All right. Is there any additional topics or discussion for future planning? I got some good feedback here, so I appreciate that. All right. Linda, I feel like it might tie in. Do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of projections you were doing on the DOR website?
So I went to this webinar, was from MMA, Mass Municipal Association, and it was run by 2 gentlemen from Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services. So it was 1 hour. I would 100% recommend it to everyone. It's called, if you go to mma.org, it's Municipal Finance 101. It takes 1 hour and it was fantastic. What they talked about is exactly what we've been doing here. You know, they really talked about, you really have to be on top of new growth, really understanding that because every town is in the same situation. You can only go up 2.5 except for new growth. And they were talking about, you know, really working with the assessor to make sure we're up to date. They were talking about everything like having exempt buildings coming onto the tax bill. So I don't know if we have that in Maynard, you know, churches getting sold now coming onto the tax bill, or people doing condo conversions or expanding their homes. And then also any new growth decisions that we're making in the town, like the Powder Mill corridor. They really talked about a concept which I don't totally understand, but what they said is we should really be looking at smoothing out our capital expenditures. So don't leave any unused capacity there. So as we're paying down debt, really work it in very much concert with the capital budgeting committee to make sure those capital expenditures are equaling out. And then really looking at our revenue, keeping up to date with anything so that we can't make a profit, but we want to make sure that whatever revenue we're getting from whatever fees are keeping up with actual expenses. And Jillian, right, what you're doing is the long-term planning is essential. And they have a template and a little like a guide for towns and some examples that we might want to look at of towns that have done long-term planning. Now, if I can share, then I went to their website and got a lot of the data that I visualized. And some of it was sort of data that came up from, can I share my screen? Oh, no, I can't share my
Yeah,
screen.
is it this one you sent me?
Oh, yeah,
or
yeah,
do you
yeah,
wanna
yeah.
share it yourself?
Okay, great. So this came up on Saturday, was what is our tax rate? And our tax rate per valuation has actually been going down, and Maynard is unique in many towns. We have a different residential tax rate versus commercial tax rate. Many of our surrounding towns don't. Now, as Peter said, the tax rate doesn't really matter, really. That's not your bottom line. So can you switch to the next one? And this is all data that's available at DOR. It's amazing data. So I looked at, this is Maynard, our income per capita going up. And then the blue chart is our single family tax bill by fiscal year. So this is the bottom line of what we all feel when we get our tax bill. And then the pink is the average tax bill as a percent of income per fiscal year. So right now you can see in Maynard, the tax burden is relatively high, and the purple is our rank with all the other 350 towns in Massachusetts. And if your rank goes up, that means it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing, and meaning compared to other towns where we're actually paying a higher percent of our income. And I think the next chart is just the gray was actually the scariest to me, is single family parcels. So this came up that Maynard is built out, and you can see we have almost no growth in the last 11 years on our single family parcels. Very, very little growth. The sort of gold color one is our average single family value by fiscal year. So we know the value of our homes is going up. And then the percent of our tax bill according to the sales value is going down. And this is I was looking at the rank of to understand when we go up in rank. Like now we're 65th. Before we had been about 50th. I wasn't quite sure if our rank in terms of our tax bill as a percent of income, if it goes up, is it good or bad? Well, it's bad if we go up. So you can see this kind of is rather startling. As the richest towns around us, people are paying such a low percentage of their family income for property taxes. So you can see, you really recognize all the richer towns around us that are Maynard is the households are relatively burdened by their tax bills compared to the richer towns. Now there's tons more data there that I thought I would just work on adding. I think that was all I got to when I sent it to you, Jillian, but it's amazing amount of data that they have that we can do some visualizations for Maynard that I thought would be good to have sort of just as data that we're constantly also looking at.
So that is fantastic work, Linda.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. And that's
And actually, I think Mike was there, and he said he had heard about like what percentage of our income are we paying in tax bills. And it was amazing that the data's there. This is a pretty simple tool. I use Power BI because that's when I teach, I use that tool. And it's very easy that we could share this with the public. And they have tons more. I was looking at excise tax and some other school enrollments that we could add into this. So it's something I'll be doing and sharing with you. We could share it with for me, it's very informative, but I would highly recommend 1 hour, listen to that MMA.org Finance 100. So for me as a newbie here, that was a fantastic, and they're a great, I think as we do this long-term planning, they were very much into it, sort of a 3-part, they had a Venn diagram with 3 parts. The capital budget is so important, long-term financial planning, and just the oversight that we're doing on the fiscal analysis was kind of the great things there, so. And I learned a lot about Maynard, so I always like that.
So I do think we should work in that tax bill as a percentage of income into our presentation to town meeting voters. Because I mean that is actually a somewhat of an encouraging message, because if you look at it in 2024, we are probably at the lowest percentage. I think if you could go back, Linda, to that chart just a second.
Jillian had it.
Oh, yeah. So is the tax bill as a percentage of income?
So one more page up, I think, Jillian.
Yep. So it's at 19. So that is the lowest in a decade. And part of the concern, the overarching like macroeconomic concern I have about this town is that our costs are rising faster than Proposition 2.5 allows for. And one of the biggest pushbacks is affordability. Well, in terms of affordability, in terms of tax bill as a percentage of income, we're at the lowest percentage in at least a decade. I don't know how far back goes because we don't have data that goes far enough back to see when the last time we were at 19.3. But my read on town meeting voters of like what their priorities are is stability, both in terms of their tax bill, but also in terms of the services they receive. And what we've gone through in the past 4 years there's been a lot of disruption, a lot of competing forces to that stability, particularly inflation. And what's happened is that people's income has risen more than 2.5%. It has risen 8%, generally matching inflation. Some people are behind, some people are ahead, but overall, it's risen about 8%. So as I kind of anticipated, at least a year ago, we are now at the lowest percentage of income because we have raised the taxes on an absolute scale, 2.5 plus growth. Meanwhile, people's income has increased faster than that. And so, I keep harping on the fact that we're coming to a crossroads where we are going to have to decide between service cuts or an override. And this sign tells us that we do have some space for an operational override to give to town meeting voters that stability, to give the services they expect while maintaining the same percentage of a tax bill as a percentage of their income that we've maintained for over a decade.
I think it's important to note, though, in this figure, it doesn't necessarily capture people who moved out of town because they can't afford it, and perhaps someone moved in that has a different lifestyle. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think that's a good point. Yeah.
That could also be a possibility, which is also this is also my very strong feeling is I want to include in our comments regarding the budget article a forward-looking statement including the work that we're doing for long-term financial planning of where we see the budget coming next year, because as we saw in the school committee presentation, we are drawing down funds to support close to level services. We're drawing down funds faster than those funds are being replenished. So, the school committee said about a year. So I think we need to give a statement to voters that in about a year time, we're going to have to have a much more difficult conversation. That the conversation is either going to be service cuts or an override. And I think this percentage income as a tax bill is going to be part of that. But I think, to give people notice that, hey, you know, if you're feeling the pressure, you might have to consider moving, or if you're concerned about the quality of the schools and you're worried about service cuts, you know, here's a heads up that you're going to have to plan for a significant change to the way Maynard's run, unless we have something come and save us, like massive savings with the solid waste, or, you know, massive development that increases our growth. I think, you know, come a year time, there's going to have to be a significant change in the way things are run, either with a significant tax increase or with a significant level of service cuts. And I think we have to prime town meeting voters that this is on the horizon and that this is a consequence of this year's budget. Based on this year's decisions, we're trying to keep everything as stable as possible, but our options are becoming increasingly limited, and that would probably only last us another year or two before we have to have that difficult discussion. And significant, both difficult discussion involving
I think
significant
it's important to also consider using some of these tools we're making to do modeling of some of these potential or proposed overrides, just to look at scenarios. Because I'll speak from my personal experience in the past when we did some of these, you know, $2 or $3 million overrides, just sort of try to help catch things up. You know, in another year or two, we were back to a deficit. So I think it's good to talk about these things together, and also start you know, drawing some things out on paper too, to see what would that actually look like. Would be good.
Well, there is some good news. I'm not all doom and gloom. There is some good news. Inflation is leveling off. We're seeing disinflation now. So, you know, we have to, you know, we're playing behind the curve, but I don't think it's going to be an 8%. We're going to see an 8% increase indefinitely. Thankfully, thank goodness, inflation is leveling off. But I think we have to catch up. You know, we're behind the curve as far as costs are concerned and our tax rate is concerned. Given the recent increase, 8% increase because of the pandemic and the ensuing financial consequences of that, you know, we're still catching up to that. Thankfully, things are normalizing. We're starting to see inflation more typical of the early decade as opposed to the tens as opposed to the 20s.
Yeah, I had a different take on this. I thought families are pretty tax burdened. If you're paying 19, you know, we're seeing it pretty steady between 19 and 20% of your per capita income for your real estate tax, that I think people in Maynard are feeling pretty tax burdened.
But Linda, I'll point out that percentage has persisted longer than a decade. Maynard has always had a high tax burden, but there's also a high level of services. Like, not all towns have sewers. Not to mention, what's also working against Maynard's favor in terms of tax burden is that we're a small community, and small communities have fixed costs that have to be paid regardless of the size of the town. And so we have a higher tax burden because we're small. And we have a diseconomy of scale because, you know, we need a DPW head, we need a whole administrative staff that have to exist regardless of our population size.
May I?
Bill, Mike has his hand up.
Yeah, may I just add another observation about that? Because I spent some
I'll
time.
be right back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I spent some time looking at the comparative data. As you know, a lot of people spend time comparing Maynard with other towns, rightly or wrongly, but it's there as a powerful force. And it was interesting looking at the chart earlier. You have towns like you know, Weston and Concord with like 11 or 12% rates, but of course those are communities where their incomes are astronomically much higher than the average one in Maynard. But if you look at towns like Acton and Sudbury, they are more in the sort of 16 to 20% range. So Maynard is still high compared to many of those other towns. We're comparable with Fitchburg, and I forget the other town there. Fitchburg, Framingham is at 18.4. Sudbury 18.9. So with those towns, Maynard is much closer in percentage, 1 or 2 percentage points away, as opposed to the 5-10% as we are from some of those very wealthy towns. So that was just an observation that I just wanted to throw in there. Thank you.
Can I respond to Mike?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of work has been done on FinCom side. Maynard is a very difficult town to generate comparables to. Because you have to control for population size, you have to control for income. You also have to control for level of services. Like Maynard has a sewer system, Maynard has a lot of infrastructure, a lot of buildings. Thankfully, we're divesting ourselves of some of those buildings that we would otherwise be on the hook to maintain. But it's very difficult to generate comparables that result in an apples to apples comparison. And I went through this exercise with the schools, look at the school finances. Jeffrey Swanberg, your fellow selectman, has select person, has also done considerable work trying to find comparables. But I think our town meeting voters need to realize that it's very difficult to do an apples to apples comparison. Most of the time, most cases when they compare us to other towns, they're doing an apples to oranges comparison. Acton, for example, is huge. Acton has a huge population base that they can spread their fixed costs across a much broader base. We do
Well,
not.
and Kevin, they have an $8 million deficit that they're going to town meeting to override for. So throwing that out there as well.
Yeah. And there's also infrastructure hits. So it's very difficult to do comparisons. I think what we have to do is we have to consider what's right for us and not necessarily try to reach for an apples to apples comparison, but ask the question, what's right for us? And I think the best thing we can do is to give stability to town meeting voters, stability in terms of level of services, stability in terms of the tax bill. Now that's a dual mandate, I recognize, and we have to trade off, but we try to keep things as stable as possible. And I know, on an absolute basis, this percentage seems high, but it's been high. I mean, if you look at the historical data, it goes back, this percentage as an income has been in the 20s for at least 2 decades. Going back, maybe if we go back to when we had the luxury of having digital in town or Monster in town, maybe it was lower because they were footing more of the bill. But, ever since Monster and digital left, we've been having a high residential tax burden. And I think voters are used to that. I think they're comfortable with that. I think a lot of people, unless they were here during the Monster era, I think most people, made an informed decision to move into this town knowing what the tax rates were, knowing what they could afford. And knowing what level of services they could expect.
All right. I am back. I missed a little bit of that exchange, so sorry about that, but had to step away for a second. Do we have additional topics we'd like to talk about on this future planning and sort of trends? All right, let's stop sharing so I can see. Nope. All right, great. I do want to keep things moving forward then. So our other topics here tonight are sort of debriefing on the February 10th budget meeting. So and sort of a discussion around that. So I think we've had a good discussion around that already. I thought the meeting went quite well. It was recorded, I believe. So if you didn't have a chance to attend, yep, you'll be able to see that recording once it's posted on the town website. So, and I think we talked a lot about different topics that came up in that meeting. But if there's anything else people want to highlight or draw attention to, please feel free to jump in.
I had a question, Jill, on the school using revolving funds. Is that something that has to be voted on, or is that to their discretion to do that? I just wasn't sure the process of that shift in the budget for them. Like, are we to make a recommendation on that, or?
No, that's their discretion.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think that's in an article that, I don't think it is. Yeah, so I think
Okay.
it's.
And so that ties in with they spent more than they were allocated. So, and they made the deficit up by revolving funds. So it's fine for them to spend more than they're allocated. That was, I guess, last year or this year.
I think the budget for the following year is bigger than what they were given, correct? And so they're using additional funds to.
From the
So they haven't
revolver.
spent it yet.
Yeah.
And that's
important to know, though,
where
this-
it is.
Sorry, Jillian, me or you?
Sorry. I was just going to say that the line item that Greg increases every year is the one that's allocated. It's not by what's the actual. So I think in the past, the school has used revolving funds or other grants to potentially change what that number is, but that's not taken into account for these high level line items that we vote at the ATM.
Right, okay.
But I see Natasha has her hand raised and is much more eloquent on this subject than I am.
No, just to add that the allocation that we get from the town is a large portion, but it never covers all expenses. You have entitlement grants that come from the state every year. So you have the IDEA, and there's certain funds that we get that help offset special education. And then those are the other funds that we have, like the circuit breaker, which we were referring to at the meeting. Those are kind of come in at different intervals. And then we have a revolving for facilities that over COVID took a big hit, but as we rent out, we're able to, that has a particular purpose, so we're able to use that for maintenance. So those are the kind of the different buckets, but the town allocation as one number is one piece, but that doesn't ever completely cover all the expenses. So it is a lot of risk in that sense, right? There's the net school spending, and that's what we always, our students benefit from above what net school spending requirements are.
Do you have anything to add, Peter, or I cut you off? So.
No, I mean, Natasha covered it. I would phrase it slightly differently than Natasha, but I mean, the school has multiple sources of income that they use, the largest of which is the town operating budget allocation, but they have other sources of income that fund the schools also. So was never supposed to be that the town allocation was going to cover everything. So.
All right. Any other topics from budget meeting? I think we've covered everything I was going to touch on. So
I had one question. The capital budget committee has like a long list of projects, and we have some amount of money. Should we be working with them as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year to see if we could knock off one of their projects from the money that we have, or is that not appropriate?
So our reserve fund is more for unexpected expenses and emergencies.
Okay.
So I think based on our guidance or whatever you want to call it, I don't know if that's something we can actually do. This reserve fund, I don't know.
If you don't spend it, it goes to free cash anyways. So if.
Right, it's not like it disappears forever.
Okay.
All right, so if there's no additional topics there, I can just touch on the ATM articles that I'm aware of so far.
Julie, I did
Yeah.
have a request. So you sent an email regarding the Saturday morning meeting that it was in person only. But then I saw on the agenda there was a Zoom link. Was there some confusion there? I was a little bit confused because I was planning based on the agenda to dial into Zoom, and then I saw your email. I was a little bit blindsided by it, to be quite honest. But I'm just wondering what happened with that, and why was it only in person? Or why was that email sent regarding it being only in person?
Yes, so it originally, when it was posted, was only going to be in person. So Chris from the select board felt strongly that it should be in person to foster discussion. So that is why it originally was not sent out with the Zoom link. When the Zoom link was updated, I circulated that information to the committee, unless I neglected to put your name on that email. Everyone on the committee should have got a second notice with the Zoom link.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
I got that.
It was on Zoom so we could record it and broadcast it. But the chairs had sort of agreed that it was like to keep it within the horseshoe shaped sort of like table.
okay. I'm just a little bit concerned that the decision was made without consulting, that decision was made after we had met and was not discussed as a committee by us, but instead was just the result of the select board chair.
So I think it was part of it was a hiccup because we were going to have our meeting on the 5th. And then there was a little hiccup where our meeting was not posted, so we couldn't actually have a meeting. So it was planned to be a topic at that meeting, but it wasn't. So
Okay.
apologies about that.
All right. Fair enough.
All right. Okay. So this is for the ATM. These are the sort of warrant tracker. So this is sort of some of the articles that we're expecting to see right now. I would say a lot of these are pretty standard things that we see at every ATM. So there is, currently there is the debt exclusion for the bleachers, which could be a big article that would be something that we can look at. I think something else of interest is this stabilization fund potentially for the Assabet Valley. So the only articles I have are from the planning board. So I was going to invite the planning board to our next meeting on the 26th. Let me double check the date. Get out my calendar, the 26th. So I was going to invite the planning board to come and talk to us about some of these bylaw changes. So I think I've circulated these to the committee before for the accessory dwelling units and the firearms at least. So I'll see if at our next meeting we can do that. But I haven't gotten any other like physically written articles yet. We still have time. We have, I'm gonna pull up my spreadsheet to let me know when we have to do our articles here. But the deadline for the article submission is February 28th. So, and the citizens petitions are due March 21st. So hopefully by our next meeting, maybe we'll have some additional articles because they'll be due that Wednesday after our meeting. But this
Can I ask
is
a
sort of the
question?
current layout. Yep.
Jillian? Just to
Please.
Greg, the transfer of free cash to general stabilization, I assume that's really a placeholder for spending free cash?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yep, okay, just make, yep. And
Oh.
we don't have a free cash number yet, or,
Not certified yet. I'd asked, I don't know. Yeah, we submitted a balance sheet, so I don't know where it is.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're right.
So I do have some requests for further information. Do you think we can get some information on the rooster prohibition?
It is exactly that. Actually, I didn't realize that roosters were an issue. But the Board of Health is considering submitting a bylaw to prohibit
I
roosters.
thought they were already prohibited. I had neighbors that couldn't have them.
You might be right, but I don't. You might be right, but no, I'm pretty sure that they're still considering this. But either way, like you'll see in a week or two, whether or not they're going to go through with it. Actually, maybe it was already submitted to the bylaw review committee, which is kind of another step in all this. Is that if it's going to be a bylaw, then we have the bylaw review committee look at it. But it is meant to not no roosters in town.
Okay. Assabet Valley, is Assabet Valley the same school that hit us with that 9% increase?
Yeah, it's the same. But it's been a while since I've gotten a heads up about this potential article to be submitted, which I did. I did also ask. I need comments. I need the whole rundown. So they should be able to explain directly to you. I don't recall off the top of my head if there's a financial impact to that. There may not be. Like it may just transfer a portion of their assessment towards that stabilization. But you'd have to ask them. Actually, that's my question. Does the finance committee anticipate asking the Assabet to come to a meeting? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't remember.
We usually do every year, but if they're going to have an article, we might want to talk to them sooner than later.
Yeah. So I think, right. And they would appreciate probably a Zoom, instead of, if you ask them to come, they'll come to your meeting.
All right. Greg, can you also send us the information about how that funding for Assabet Valley is decided?
Oh, it's voted on by the Assabet Valley Board, which there's a member of there's a Maynard resident on. So I didn't go to the board meeting, but I imagine it's a similar setup that select board, school committee, other sort of like public bodies have, where the staff submits their recommendations and then the board votes on it. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the name of the Maynard rep.
Is it an appointed position or is this an elected position?
It's
Elected.
Let me look that up really quick.
It's elected. Pamela, I can't remember her last name.
Yeah, thank you,
Pretty
Natasha.
good.
I thought it was elected, but it's been a while. I
don't know. I think she's still on. I think she was reelected recently, maybe last year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Reneker sounds right.
Yeah, Pamela. I think it starts with an R. I just can't remember her. Yeah.
I'm looking it up on the website right now, just because it's Pam Reneker, Reiniger. But anyways, there's a number of board members representing the different towns, and so that was I basically get a letter, and the letter says how much their assessment is assigned to Maynard.
Yeah. And we do have a representative, so we do at least have some say, but I think particularly if this is going to have an additional financial impact, we really need to talk to the school committee about that.
Can I just say, Kevin, you weren't at the Saturday meeting, and sorry, you couldn't listen on Zoom either, apparently. I do think there's some opportunity for Maynard not to accept that assessment. I don't quite know what the legal thing is or the mechanism for that. But I mean, just as a matter of principle, Assabet School Committee can't appropriate money from Maynard. Maynard Town Meeting has to do that. So I was poking around the web today trying to figure out, and I didn't come up with an answer yet. But I don't think we have to accept that. We always have. and I certainly want to support the Voc school, but you know, I don't know, there may be some opportunity to push back on that.
Greg, do you know anything about that?
Actually, I made a note to myself on Saturday to ask the same question because I know I don't know. So I can ask town council, but what I'll probably do is I'll first start with, you know, I don't know. I might start with council, but they may just ask me to check in with vocational school themselves. I don't know. I'm sorry. I've never been asked.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think town meeting voters need to be aware that there's this huge increase that they're asking for. And if we could potentially have, you know, I think town meeting voters would, I know it's early, but I think, you know, I think they would appreciate having a say, at least a yes or no vote on whether to improve that increase for the vocation.
The other aspect to it that we discussed Saturday also was it may be a reflection of increased students. And we just don't know, or I don't know yet. So that it's really not that it's that much of an increase, it's that we've had an increase in students attending the school. So and we need to figure that out. When the Assabet people come, they always do a really good breakdown on, you know, what our students are attending and give us all those numbers. So
yeah,
that's probably
so
the
okay, so
starting point.
they'll be able to present that information. What I appreciate, Greg, is if you could let this committee know when you get an answer back from legal as to what our options are. I definitely want to make sure town meeting voters have a say on this.
All right. So we have, our recommendations are due on, just double checking, April 9th. So we have about 4 meetings. 4 meetings or so before we have to make our written recommendations. So I'm planning to invite the planning board for their articles at the next meeting. It sounds like we would like to talk to Assabet potentially before April 9th as well, especially if there's an article. Are there any other people we would like to invite? Perhaps the DPW or any of these articles? These generally seem somewhat routine.
They are, but it's relative to the enterprise budget. So when when he submits the water rates and the sewer rates, it might be a lot of the same information. But all the department heads know that they're on call to the finance committee if you ever ask.
You know,
Do we want to fight,
Yeah.
sorry, the CPC, because I'm not sure where we're doing with the bleachers. Just to see what they're spending their money on, or
I don't think they're out with an article yet. So
Okay.
I would want to wait to see what their
Okay.
article is.
thank you.
Can I just throw in, Jillian, in addition to talking to departments about articles, and maybe this is what Greg said, I missed it slightly, but if we want to talk to anybody about their, you know, part of the operating budget also.
Yes,
Right. So
so
just
that
for
will be an
our-
article.
So on the basis of that, I mean, I would like to talk, I mean, I always think it's useful to have Justin, if, you know, especially where it's just a Zoom meeting. You know, be good to hear from him. We traditionally have had public safety, each of the chiefs come in. Given the tight timeline, I feel less compelled to do that, but I don't know what other people think about that. I don't want to slight them in any way, but I just don't see a lot of controversy in their budget for this year, but maybe other people think differently.
I got the answer I need regarding the resulting services. So, you know, I heard from, you know, their boss that they're getting level services. So I've heard what I need to hear. Regarding
They did also
DPW
make a presentation to the select board, so on board docs, those documents are there as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
in
had
case
them
that's
kind of do like they are prepared to meet with you if you ask. Just, but as you just said, Jillian, I made them do I made them do a dry run to the select board, for the two chiefs.
The thing I do want to hear about is the solid waste committee when they finally decide on a recommendation. I think that's going to have a hopefully it will have a financial impact on this coming fiscal year. I'm hoping, I'll hope that we can get the trash to save us. But, you know, as soon as they make a recommendation, I think we should have them in because there's this, I'm hoping there's a significant financial impact to be had there. Also on DPW, maybe not necessarily an in-person meeting, but I do think I want to hear from DPW what the state of the water supply is and whether the system is being stressed and generally, you know, the state of the water supply, because that's something we've had our eye on for a little while now, that we figured, yeah, the water supply is stressed, we need money. So I just want to follow up with that and see where we're at.
Jillian, is there anyone that we should talk to about the employee benefits? Because that's 20% of the budget. And I'm wondering, is there anyone that could inform us why that's going up some? I mean, Greg mentioned health insurance going up, but
I think that'd be Greg.
Yeah,
I'm not sure who that would be besides Greg.
No, I'm the guy. So I'm
okay.
I'm the agent of the select board. So any contracts that are negotiated on behalf of the select board, that's health insurance. But benefits is health insurance, retirement, unemployment. There might be one more. So yeah, but it's so retirement also went up. I mean, I'd have to look at what all the numbers are.
This could also be an email to the FinCom, Greg, but I'd like to know where we are regarding our retirement obligations and how well funded our pension plans is.
Sure.
The OPEB
Like,
stuff.
it doesn't need to be in person, it could just be an email, as far as I'm concerned.
You mean do you mean OPEB? Do you mean retirement? Because it's kind of yeah, you might. So I got the retirement, which is called PERAC. That's the acronym. I got a whole separate report from them the other day, but it was only addressed to me, so it's a lot of numbers. But you can also invite the director, Ken DeMars, like kind of similar to another department, if you will. He can come talk to you, or you can wait until I get my audit report, which usually does get into. But the auditor's only left in January, so like I don't have it yet. But when the audit comes out, usually you say like, okay, this is how much progress you're making towards OPEB and your your retirement.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to do a cursory review to see where we're at. You know,
Okay.
if we're, you know, how well funded are our retirement obligations, our post-employment obligations.
Okay, I think I get what you're asking. I'll see what I can get.
And yeah, and I'm not a detailed review because it's not an area of significant concern, but I just want to do a cursory review of those numbers.
Okay.
Sorry, when I stopped sharing, I saw that you have your hand up, Natasha. Do you have is that an old hand?
Just to state that the school committee will be discussing the bleacher project, the alumni project as a whole before the next CPC meeting, which would be Their meeting's February 21st, to decide if we would be looking to recommend delaying from annual town meeting to instead to pursue funding at spring town meeting. I mean, fall town meeting, special town meeting. So I know we talked about it Saturday, but I realized Kevin wasn't there, and just wanted to restate that as from a planning perspective. We are not looking at an article at this moment, and we will be scheduling a special meeting to vote on what we recommend, how we recommend timeline. And I believe, Greg, you and Brian were thinking about, or just trying to figure out the costs associated with the contractual pieces, because I think that was the outstanding questions that we had. You know, any delay comes with an expense. So we have Collier's contract and Huntress, and so that is still unknown. Okay,
Thank you for that reminder. Appreciate it.
no problem.
All right. So what I'm hearing is that on the 26th, our next meeting is on the 26th. Topic is probably going to be ATM planning and any draft article discussion. And our special guest will be the planning board, specifically for their articles. I could perhaps put on a future projection or planning on the agenda and routine agenda. I'll put FY25 and future projection planning. So it sounds like we might want to talk to Justin, the DPW. We might want to talk to Assabet. We might want to, so it sounds like the schools and the CBC and the bleachers, at least not until after the 21st, if that goes forward, but it might be paused. So it sounds like the other people I'll be reaching out to are Justin, Assabet currently. I might recommend to make Justin his own meeting, so then we can talk about the different budgets, the ATM articles, the state of the water supply, planning for future growth and development, the water supply, and also potentially trash stickers. So that would also be the potential trash committee. I forget what their exact name is, please forgive me. But I can reach out to them. So, and then I'll have to ask, Greg, I might need your help with Assabet to figure out who that contact is, because I don't know if I recall their email. So thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, are there any pressing topics we want to add to the 26th meeting? So right now, the only guest for the articles would be the planning board currently. And we could do in the subsequent meeting, maybe I'll ask if Justin's available, because that seems like another one, or Assabet, see what everyone's schedule is like. So we'll have 2 meetings in March that we can play around with. Okay.
Sounds
Hearing
good.
no additional. So that I sort of jumped into the routine agenda. So that was the future planning part. So I think is there any other discussion or questions or comments about the ATM stuff? If not, we can just move on to the rest of the routine agenda. Nope, I'm hearing none. So I didn't get any minutes from our prior meeting, but I think, Katie, you took our minutes for the 10th, the Saturday meeting, right?
Yes, and I'm almost
So you
done
can
with them,
maybe-
so I'll send them to you this week.
Great, thanks. That I know that's pretty quick turnaround. So I can't recall who took notes at our prior meeting.
I'm not sure if Kevin
have to
did,
check.
but then left it, to Linda and I to mediate after that. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I do have some minutes getting, I'm just recovering my laptop right now. I had a hard drive failure, so I'm getting my backups off Google Drive, but I will, there are some minutes that I have that need to be polished up, that I'll have ready for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. That was from, I think, January 22nd, maybe. That's right. Okay, awesome. Are there any other updates? I have one update. If you get an automated email from Mass Ethics Training, that's a tongue twister. This is real. Please do that. It's from an email called Skillburst. So for example, I was due in March. I think it's something we have to do once a year or once every 3 years. I forget. It's basically your ethics training to be on a board. So I sent it to Greg Wilson and was like, is this spam? Can I click on this? He's like, no, that's real. Please do that. So I just wanted to mention that here because I thought it was junk and I was ready to delete it. And if you need that website, you can also check on the website to see when you're due for that training. Like if you're not sure, I can send you the link. Just send me an email.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what if it
So
goes to our
that is
spam?
my
So
update.
that would be good to have the link.
Sure. Yeah, so that's my update. Are there any other updates that anyone else would like to share tonight from other committees or that you're liaisoning to or anything?
I'll mention I'm the liaison to the Senior Center Committee, and they're off to a very strong start. They talked about possibly having a placeholder line item in this year's budget. It looks like from Saturday's meeting, that's not really something that can be done. One thing I thought that was very promising is they talked about this Olympic Village model of senior centers where they're really going to look at all the resources we have in town for, like they use the Boys and Girls Club for pickleball, and they're really collaborating with Marlborough and Stowe senior centers. So kind of having maybe a smaller senior center, but using all the resources we have in town, the library, the training room at the fire station. And then we had a nice visit at the Sudbury Senior Center, which was a very interesting model. The senior center isn't that big. It's a community center. So from 9 to 4, it's a senior center. But from 4 o'clock on and the weekends, it's a community center. So they really share the space, really leverage it up. So, but they're off to a good start. So it's something we just are going to have to plan for, hopefully in the next year or so.
Thank you for sharing. All right. Anyone else have any other additional updates tonight? I think we've covered all of our topics. I am not hearing any. Would anyone like to perhaps make a motion?
I can make a motion to adjourn our meeting, the date on February 12th.
At 9:37 p.m. All right, so Katie made that motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Peter.
All right, Peter seconds it. All right, so I will take a roll call vote. Ooh, did I take a roll call vote to start the meeting? That's a good question.
Oh, I don't think we did.
I think I did.
Yeah, no, you
Yes.
called us off.
Oh, you
Yeah.
did.
You did.
Sorry.
Okay. I was like, uh-oh.
That's right. You did.
Okay.
You did.
Linda?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Katie?
Yes.
Nathan?
Yes.
Khadija?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
I am also a yes. So we have adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.